Okay, everybody, welcome to the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. I'm Brad Listi, and I'm in Los Angeles. It's great to be with you. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please remember to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your shows. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Bluesky and Instagram. So today I will be in conversation with Honor Jones, who is celebrating the publication of her debut novel, Sleep. It is available now from Riverhead Books. Sleep is a novel about motherhood and childhood and the cost of secrets and the burden of love. I had a great conversation with Honor Jones, who spoke with me from her office at the Atlantic. That conversation is coming up in just a bit. Today's episode is brought to you by Mulholland Books, publisher of the novel Buzzkill by J. Robert Lennon. Buzzkill is the official May pick of the Otherppl Book Club. That is my book club. You can sign up for the Otherppl Book Club over at otherppl.com. Get a new book delivered to your door every 30 days. I interview book club authors on this program, and I will be in conversation with J. Robert Lennon talking about Buzzkill in the not-too-distant future, so stay tuned for that. One more time, the novel is called Buzzkill, the official May pick of the Otherppl Book Club by J. Robert Lennon, available from Mulholland Books. So a reminder before we get going that I have a weekly email newsletter. You can sign up for it over at bradlisti.substack.com. It's a great way to keep up with this show. I will let you know on a weekly basis about the latest episodes. I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. So if that sounds good, head on over to Substack and sign up. I also want to give a quick plug to my new company. It is called Deep Dive, and it will be launching soon. Deep Dive specializes in the creation of long-form educational audio courses, and the debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. It will feature more than 50 hours of instruction from dozens of today's leading writers, including Melissa Broder, Hannah Pittard, Emily St. John Mandel, Steve Almond, Matt Bell, Matthew Salasis, Stephen Graham Jones, Tiffany Clark Harrison, Porchista Hakpour, Deb Olin Unferth, Juliet Escoria, Madeline Lucas, Vivi Ganeshananthan, etc. There's never been a writing course quite like this one in terms of its breadth and depth, and I'm very excited about it. I'm the host of the course. I'm the interlocutor and the guide, and I've been working on this for nearly a year. It's going to be available soon. I'm almost done with post-production. It's been a lot of work. Can you hear it in my voice? I've been swimming in audio. 3 episodes of this show a week, plus I'm putting together a course that is more than 50 hours in length. But it's going to be very cool when it's done, and I can't wait to share it with you. So if you want to sign up for the Deep Dive newsletter, you can do that at www.deepdive.audio to keep up with all the latest. You can also follow Deep Dive on Bluesky and Instagram. And of course, I will let you know here on this show when things are ready to roll. All right, so my guest once again is Honor Jones. Her debut novel is called Sleep, and it is available from Riverhead Books. Honor Jones is a senior editor at The Atlantic. She previously worked for The New York Times. We had a great conversation, and I am very pleased to be able to share it with you right now. Here I am with Honor Jones.
I wrote these 2 personal essays for The Atlantic about my own divorce, and they sort of struck a nerve. Lots of men on 4chan were very angry, but a lot of other people felt, inspired or seen by them. And so all of a sudden I had a few requests to write a divorce memoir, and there's nothing in the world I wanted to do less than write a divorce memoir. But I had this moment where I was like, oh, if I did want to do something, like, what would it be? And I started to think about a story about divorce in which the divorce was sort of the least important part of it, that wasn't really concerned with answering the questions of why this divorce happened and was more concerned with the scope of a life. And that just let me get into things that I was much more interested in than my own story, which I didn't think was like actually that dramatic or interesting.
So fiction gave you like the space.
Definitely.
And you had not written any fiction prior to this? Like, had you ever dabbled?
No, I mean, I was a poetry writing major in college, which is kind of like majoring in feelings. But that part of my life I'd really left behind. And it had just been journalism for a really long time.
So poetry, where did you go to school?
University of Virginia.
Okay. And you studied poetry and you were going to be a poet?
No, that's not a thing. I mean, it is, but not for me. No, actually, I had interned at the Virginia Quarterly Review while I was in college. So I was writing poetry and I started editing there when I was still an undergraduate and like got to actually do all these amazing things. So even then I was like, oh, I want to edit.
Why?
I love other people's stories. It's such like a privilege and it can be really intimate to like get inside somebody else's head and experience in that way. I really love that part of my job and working with writers with different voices, and there's some amount of ventriloquism, but also you're trying to get at what they're really trying to say.
You're like midwifing.
Yeah, very much.
And I'm wondering if the work that you've done as an editor, like with the benefit of hindsight, like in some way informed your debut novel, like, and if the process of editing so many different writers, that had to have been beneficial to you as you set about to draft a manuscript and then also to like revise it and kind of sort it out. Or maybe you have more blind spots when it's your own work. Like, how did that process go? I'm
sure I do. But there is like a brutality to editing, which I like when I'm subjecting myself to it. You know, you just, I came up in a newspaper. I was at the Times for 12 years, and you edit really quickly, you cut really quickly, and you move things around structurally, like really quickly. And that's, I think, part of my fiction writing. I'm like, not there, here, not there, here. You know, I think the arc of the book was always very, very clear to me what went where, but inside every sentence, I was just editing and editing and editing. I don't think I sound like myself until I've edited myself like 3 times.
And you're not as precious about it as maybe some other fiction writers might be, because you're doing this all day long. I feel like there is a certain like expediency. Is that the word? Or expedience? You're the editor.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Expedient. That sounds right.
Yeah. Expediency. And, and there's also just a comfort level, like with that speed and the necessity of like shrinking things down, getting to their essence and delivering on deadline, that I feel like journalism occasions that can serve a writer of fiction. It can make them maybe more productive or just less angsty about the process.
I think for me, that seems very true. And just like having to be decisive and being like, I'm not going to write about that. That's not the story. This is the story. I felt, at least for this project, like very clear about those decisions.
So your novel it's the story of a life. It covers basically a woman's life up until her mid-30s, right? Mm-hmm. And her name is Margaret. And I don't know how much to divulge, but I do feel like we need to, divulge some stuff just so that listeners can have context.
Sure.
She grew up in an affluent family in Jersey, right?
That's right.
And there's a mother character named Elizabeth who goes by Elizabeth. It's not like mom. It's Elizabeth, which I found notable. And her mother is kind of the... how did the New York Times Review put it? She's the matriarch of the unsaid.
I thought that was a great line.
I did too. I was like, okay, because that kind of crystallized it. She's a very vivid character, and she has this kind of outsized presence in your protagonist, Margaret's life. Margaret is Elizabeth's daughter. And they have a strong but complicated relationship. And the marriage between Margaret's parents is complicated. And then the relationship between Margaret and her brother Neil is complicated and involves some abuse.
That's right.
And that's the foundation for her adult existence, where we find her, and she is divorced and navigating that, and then trying to kind of date and navigating that and trying to figure out who she is.
Mm-hmm. And parenting two daughters.
Which like nobody is an expert at, right?
No,
Like
exactly.
Parenthood is such, I mean, there's something kind of like animal about it. You sort of know instinctively how to do it, hopefully, but like everybody's sort of just making it up as they go.
Yeah, for sure.
So how much of this, when you began, was clear to you? And how much of it did you find in the work itself? Like what did you have when you began the novel?
I think I kind of had all of it. Maybe that's an annoying thing to say. I mean, I think I knew what I wanted to begin the book with, this childhood and these relationships and this event, this transgression. And I knew that, I wanted her to grow up to be a divorced mom and sort of. And then there were definitely things I discovered as I went along. I wasn't totally sure what was going to happen with this boyfriend, although I knew that there would be sort of minefields in that relationship as well. But in some ways, I think it was kind of a simple story because it's sort of a story of like, this thing happened and then how does she deal with it?
It's a novel about trauma and the lingering impacts of trauma. And, is it okay for me to just say her brother sexually abused her when she was a child? I feel like we kind of, otherwise we're going to just be tiptoeing around it. Mm-hmm. I don't want to give away the game, but I think that you can enjoy the novel, even if you know that going in. And it's interesting to me, not only in your novel, but in life, the ways in which trauma affects a person as they proceed through their life, like it's not always like the most obvious. It can be very subtle. It can affect people in ways that they themselves don't even necessarily recognize. In fact, that's often the case.
Definitely.
So I'm curious to know about the psychological and emotional complexities of that stuff and how you approached it. Like it's a big responsibility to depict that on the page and to do so with like some accuracy and some real humanity.
Yeah, I like how you put that as a responsibility. I mean, one thing I felt strongly about was like, what happens to her is quite quiet, I think, compared to other things that have happened to other people. It's not violent, it happens when she's sleeping mostly. And so she sort of knows about it almost like after the fact. But I knew I wanted to tell a story of this kind of transgression that was like hard to explain. Like, I think I thought a lot about, and part of the book, when she's a grown-up, she's an editor and it's the Me Too era. So she's telling all these stories and there is this sense that the floodgates are opening and people are talking about all these things that happened to them that maybe they didn't realize were so terrible at the time, or they did, or, there are all these stories. But I think there's a sense, I wonder how much that openness has trickled down to like the most vulnerable people, children, and also in the family, like this little unit where transgressions and violations can be really complicated by love and bonds and responsibility to various parties. And I think there's still a lot of that sort of thing that's just extremely hard to talk about. So I sort of knew I wanted to go to tell a story that was really hard to talk about in a really specific but not gratuitous, kind of quiet way. I wanted the reader to know what had happened, even though the character is a kid, and so she is really confused and doesn't really understand and sort of grows up and understands more, but it's a process. But I wanted that sense of responsibility I had toward being like, the reader should know. Like, the reader should just see this and understand. And then the mystery is not what happened to her. The mystery is like what she does with it after.
I think it's very deft the way that you portray it, because there is some mystery. You're a kid, and this is happening to Margaret when she's asleep, or, whether she's asleep or she's almost asleep. Mm-hmm. And it's night, and it's disorienting.
Very, yeah. So trying to capture that disorientation was a lot of what I was trying to do.
Yeah, like what happened? What was that? Why? Mm-hmm. Am I making too big of a deal out of this? And then there's a BFF character named Biddy, and that's a lovely relationship on the page. Like their kind of friendship and the way they talk and just their little shorthand,
Yeah, I loved writing that character. I just think I mean, I love friendships in fiction generally. I think they're really interesting. And I think they have an interesting relationship, but it's also like, it's just like really pure. Biddy's just the best. And
Is it based on like a friendship of yours? It has to
I
be.
think for sure it's like a composite of like all the best friends I've ever loved, over time. Although I think she's like ballsier and like a little like bolder than probably my friends and I were at that age.
But what's interesting, and again, this is a bit of a spoiler, but what's interesting to me is that the Margaret character does not confide in Biddy when it comes to this abuse. And that, again, I think was a choice that squares with how it often unfolds. There's just this like thing that is unsayable, and this fear that if it is said, it will somehow toxify the relationship or destabilize it.
Yeah.
Like Margaret kind of needs that friendship to be untainted by this weird bad thing that happened to her.
Yeah. I mean, I think like Margaret's wrong. Like, I think she could 100% tell her best friend this. And I think it's like the truth would change nothing with Biddy. Like, it wouldn't damage I don't think it would have damaged that relationship. But yeah, it's so complicated, her feelings about it. I think she feels like, I think a lot of, maybe this is especially like a girl thing, but you grow up with a best friend and you wear the same outfits and you want to like have the same thought at the same time and you don't want anything to be different between you. And so she has this feeling not only that she doesn't want to be different, but almost that if she tells Biddy, like it will have happened to her too. Like she's protecting her from this knowledge, which is a way of protecting like her double, but also herself. And she thinks eventually, if you keep a secret a really long time, like the person you kept it from might be angry at you. They might think you lied to them. And I don't think Biddy would have felt that way, but I think that is something a lot of us feel a lot when we've kept a secret from somebody. Like it becomes too late,
Right. It goes on for long enough, and it's like, okay, this is just going in the vault.
Exactly.
And I think that the pressure on a kid when there is incest or sexual abuse within the family is really tough, because the fear, I think, is that you'll blow up your family.
Yeah.
It's a legitimate question. Like if Margaret were to have gone to her mom and said, hey, this happened, what happens to her brother? What happens to her parents' marriage? What happens to the family?
Yeah.
It's an enormously difficult thing to grapple with.
Yeah. And I'm interested in the way that kids, like, I mean, I have children and I think they're so at everybody's whim, like you're so vulnerable as a child. You don't get to decide things, like, you're told what's happening. But you also, I think, I remember feeling as a kid like I was responsible for figuring things out. Like you have no power and yet you think you have power, and that can be, so you try to, people talk about parentified children, whatever. You're trying to protect your parents or you're trying to smooth things along. And that feels like a thing you can do when in fact, like, you're the most vulnerable person in the room.
Yeah. It's terrifying as a parent to think about.
It?
I mean, I say this, and yet I'm old enough to remember when we were growing up and kids could just be outside all day, and like this was way before Me Too and all these stories of abuse and the way that it had become more widely known, like how women were experiencing the world and how much bad behavior there was to kind of cope with. And then like we're going on a trip this summer, and like I'm in my head, like this is parental anxiety, the way that it works on you. But there's this quiet voice in my head that's already making rules for my daughter, where it's like, you can go out and like wander around town, but just like you can't be by yourself, and it's like, I don't know, there's something kind of sad about that. I guess it's sort of natural, but
yeah,
it's a little like reading your novel. It was like, God, there's just stuff can happen in this world, and you want to protect your kids, and you can't always protect them.
I mean, I think in the novel is like a sort of profound example of like a failure to protect, I think. But one thing the character is just obsessed with as she grows up is like, how do you raise a child to be safe without raising them to be afraid? How do you like wear your vigilance lightly and not go too far? I think we all have that experience when you're like looking at your kid and you're like, are you okay? Like, are you really okay? What's going on? Did somebody say something? You like sort of, and they're like, leave me alone. Like, you can easily go too far and not just let them be and let them have fun and let them, be lighthearted and not be worried. So this character is very concerned about like doing, what we all do to some extent, like the opposite of what we think our parents failed at. And she is desperate to keep her kids safe, but also like really doesn't want to put, her own like trauma on them in its own damaging way. And I think she's aware of it. That's the thing I like about this character is like, she's like damaged in all these ways, but she's also like very suspicious of that damage and thinking about her own impulses and like trying to be where she is and be happy, Like there's a lot of fun, happy scenes, I think, in the book too, and just the profusion of family life and the hilarious things her kids say and sort of the like her hapless ex who's kind in all these ways. And like, there's a funny scene, I think, she meets the new girlfriend and it's just like the drama of parenting kind of puts everything else into relief.
Yeah. I mean, that's another part of your novel that I really admired is the fact that it's not, there are no like easy outs, and the complexity of life is depicted really well. Like,
thank you.
Families where there's abuse and where there's like marital difficulties and like mental health issues, there's still like happiness and like the kids are still having fun in the pool.
Yep.
And there can be a divorce and, the couple can have kids and then they split up, and it doesn't mean that it's like War of the Roses. Exactly. And they're like throwing like wine glasses at each other,
Well,
like.
I did very much want to write a divorce story that wasn't angry. Like I really, I just think like one of the interesting things about divorce for me is like, there's nobody like right there to blame. You're not like the dishes didn't get done and you're not like, oh, the patriarchy. It's like, no, like I just like didn't do the dishes because I was tired. Like that's on me. It's fine. So I just, like writing something free of sort of that feeling. I mean, this character and her ex do like have some really complicated dynamics, but generally like there's nothing to blame him for. What's going on with, at one point he does say like in a joking, but like maybe 100% right way, like, did you divorce me to get back at your mother? And it's like, well, no, but these histories, the decisions we make as adults like are often rooted like so far before like whatever episode is at hand. So that was something I was interested in.
Ezra.
Yes.
I liked Ezra. He's a nice guy.
He's a nice guy. Yeah.
He's not a bad guy.
He's going to be okay.
He's going to be all right. So you started work on this book. You kind of had the whole thing in your head. And then you've got this day job as an editor at The Atlantic, and you're constantly midwifing other people's stories into print. Mm-hmm. And you've got how many kids? 3. So that's a good number. And you're like, okay, and now I'm going to write a novel.
Well, I mean, when people say like how central is divorce to this novel, like the real answer is like, I would not have written this novel, I think, if I hadn't been divorced, just because, I have 3 mornings a week when I don't have my kids, and I have, 1 weekend day usually ish. Although, you always have like extracurriculars that somebody needs a ride to. I had a lot of time, and I also really, really missed them and felt super guilty and bad. And so it just, writing, I was like, I want to make this time really matter. And so it sort of happened just at the right time for me, where I could put a lot of feelings and thoughts and, loneliness into this project that feels now like something that was really important.
That's a very healthy approach.
Thank you.
Most people would have just like eaten shitty food and like watched Netflix.
I did some of that too.
I was going to say, at least you please tell me that it wasn't just like pure, like, a focused creation of literature. That would be intolerable.
I take it back. It was only like 70% that.
Yeah. So you started and you worked, and like you have this kind of like journalistic, editorial, unprecious approach. Did it just shoot out of you? How long did it take?
It took a year. Yeah. Between like, I had this amazing agent, Bill Clegg, and I was just beginning to have these conversations, and I had a conversation with him, and he was like, oh, sounds like you kind of like know what you want to do. Like, go do it. And I was like, oh my God. Like that felt so profound to me to have somebody, like almost just like give me permission to do that. And so I think it was like a year after that that I sent it off.
Wow.
And then, of course, a long editing process. Then it's like a year and a half before a book actually sees the light of day. But
well, and Bill, I mean, I've talked to Bill on this show. He's an author in his own right, but he's a well-known agent, and I know he probably had some editorial feedback for you.
He was, yeah. I mean, I am obsessed with him. He's amazing. He's a genius. He gave me just the kind of notes where it's like, this one thing seemed off, or like, tell me more about that. Like, there doesn't seem to be enough of like this character yet. I write, I think, pretty condensed. So there were definitely parts where I was like, I need this to breathe more. I need to say more and like open this moment up a little bit more. And he gave me crucial notes.
Was there anything in the drafting process? Because this is, as we've been discussing, a novel that deals with some delicate stuff and some intimate stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a sexual narrative that is like really psychologically astute, but I could imagine, and then there's the divorce stuff, there's the abuse stuff, there's the, depicting marital strife and all that kind of stuff. I could imagine a writer hitting a roadblock with one or more of the above and maybe, resisting it, even in ways that are sort of subsurface. I just feel like a lot of times writers will be working on a project and there will be moments in the drafting where you have to sort of reckon with what you're avoiding. Like, was there anything in the drafting process that you avoided that maybe Bill or an editor nudged you and said, hey, we need more here? Or I think that maybe you might be missing something?
I think there might be something wrong with me because I'm very like, the things that were hardest to write were the things that I was most interested in writing about. Does that make sense? Like, that's the point of it. Like, that's what I'm here to do, kind of. The things that I was like unsure about, like I wasn't sure how to end it. I was like, I think originally I had ended it in the house in New Jersey. And I think both Bill and my editor, who's also incredible, Sarah McGrath, were like, that doesn't feel right. Like, it should end in the city. Like, it should end in her like future life. Like, what's next? So that was, I thought, like a really important note. And then, I'm really happy that I gave the character that like, joyful, if also like slightly indeterminate moment at the end. But it does feel like an opening up to what's going to happen after this. But no, the hard parts, I was like, oh, I knew I was going to write about them before I started the book. Like, that was kind of what the book was. I was like, that's what the book is about.
Well, and maybe this work that you do as an editor makes you better predisposed to like avoiding your own BS and like
maybe
and just more predisposed to avoiding. Like you're probably doing this with writers that you're editing all the time, where you're catching them in moments of withholding.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like if it bleeds, it leads. Like put it in the front. But no, one of the interesting things I think about editing, which I was talking to somebody else about the other day, but like I think I have a lot of experiences of like editing personal essays, especially. And you talk to people and they're like, oh, yeah, like, well, this in my family. And you're like, wait, what? Like, what did your family think was normal that you used to do all the time? Like, actually, that's incredibly strange. So I think it's interesting just to think about the family as like this little microcosm of culture where you speak a certain language, you accept certain norms. And then when you tell somebody from outside that world, like what things are like, they're like, no, that seems kind of crazy and wrong or alarming in some way. So it's interesting to think about like Margaret's story in that, this totally closed off world that then opens up and she begins to see it differently.
So, and you had Bill as your agent before you began drafting or after?
I don't even know enough about like how this works like generally to answer that question. I had like a conversation with him and he was like, write it and send it to me. And I was like, okay. And then he liked it. And so I was like, oh, I guess you're my agent now.
That was it. That's lucky.
But he might have hated, he might have hated it. So in that case,
but he did
gone a different way. But he didn't.
All right. So these personal essays that you wrote, forgive me for forgetting the names of them. In fact, I didn't realize there were two. There was one that I saw online about your divorce that I know, like there was a Reddit thread about it that I stumbled into.
Oh, really?
I was like, people have feelings about this essay. Like it really struck a nerve. And it was you writing about getting divorced and wanting to be divorced.
Yeah, it probably was how I demolished my life.
That's what it was, yeah.
Which is a headline I wrote myself. which is like nobody who wasn't like a professional editor would be like, let me write like the most like shocking headline that will make people the most mad about this essay. Yeah, there was a lot of I've been doing this a long time, and I'm used to having writers who've gotten attacked in like shocking ways on the internet. And I still was a little bit surprised by how much of a response there was. I don't think those people even read the book, though. It's like crazy enough. I mean, read the essay. It's crazy enough that like you kind of just have to set it aside.
No, and I get that, but what's interesting to me is your work, in the world of magazines and with personal essays, and going through this as like a kind of surrogate, for other writers, and seeing the ways in which their work can be attacked and their personhood can be attacked. I mean, this stuff can get brutal.
Yeah.
And then seeing all that and being like, you know what, I'm going to write an essay called "How I Demolished My Life." So you're like courageous and like, I'm going to do this, and I kind of know what's probably going to come my way in some form. And I have to believe that all of that prep and all of that experience would make you less fearful about publishing a novel. Like, this is no big deal to you. Like, you get a review, it's not so great, whatever, or, somebody on Amazon comes after the book.
I think I do luckily have a thicker skin because of some of that prep, for sure. I mean, when people are angry about an essay on the internet, often they've only read the headline anyway. 100% those people are not going to read a novel, not this novel at least. So I don't really feel like that's going to happen in the same way that it happens with the journalism, which is funny because there's a lot more words in this than there were. And of course, it's fiction. It's not just like me being like, I got divorced, like, na 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 na. Certain men on the internet did not like that.
Which, by the way, was almost the title of that essay before you went with.
We workshopped it,
I was going to say, yeah, that was a roundtable discussion, and How I Demolished My Life ended up winning. But.
Exactly.
So I want to know more about you and your formation as a creative person. You said you went to the University of Virginia. Is that where, did you grow up in Virginia, or did you grow up elsewhere?
No, I grew up in Connecticut and then outside Philadelphia. But I'm a legacy at the University of Virginia, and that mattered back then. So that's how like a lot of members of my family went to UVA, and so that's how I ended up there.
It's a good school.
It's a great school. Yeah.
Right? It's like got that like Thomas Jefferson architecture and energy happening, right?
Yes. Mr. Jefferson is still how many people at UVA refer to him. Yes.
I don't know how, like, is it a really formal atmosphere? I know some of these Southern schools, it's like the people wear like suits and ties to football games. And
yes, you do wear a sundress, ideally in the school colors, to the football game. I don't know. It's a big enough, like, it's a state school. It's big enough. Like, there's all sorts of worlds within it, which is something I liked about it. Like, I'm still super close with like all these women from this one sorority. I wasn't in the sorority, but I lived in the sorority satellite house. So I like went to the formals sometimes, whatever. And, half of them ended up in New York City and are still my friends. And I was also in this kind of bizarre little tiny poetry world.
You were like so earnest. You have to be an earnest human being to be like, I'm going to major in poetry, right?
Yeah. It was so fun, though. We just read, it was wonderful.
And it's a good education.
It was a really good education. Yeah. And UVA has a really good MFA program. So it had like, I got to take a class with Charles Wright, like Lisa Raspar, Rita Dove. Like, it's got some amazing writers there.
So prior to college, like growing up in Connecticut and what did you say, outside of Philly? Mm-hmm. Like, what kind of kid were you? And like, does where you are now, like, does it track? Like, were you on this course your whole life, or were you a kid who like nobody would have pointed to and said like, oh, she's going to publish a novel someday?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if anybody knew I was going to publish a novel, but I always loved to read. Like, no, that was always, I was always in the world of books. Yeah. I don't know what kind of kid I was. It feels like a long time ago now. Probably pretty similar to the way I am now. But I did have a best friend, who was like sort of a biddy type. And yeah, I did always love to read.
Who were some big, like, what were some big books for you? Like, were there books that like set you on your course?
God, I mean, I remember there's a lot of Virginia Woolf in this book, and I remember reading To the Lighthouse, probably in high school, and not understanding really anything, but loving it. God, I don't know. I remember reading like Even Cowgirls Get the Blues and loving it. Like the things you read when you're young, are like there were so many writers that I was obsessed with. But I think I did. There is a book in Sleep that I referenced that I had, like a old collection of children's poetry, which is like actually like quite offensive to go back and read now. But I remember just being like, oh, like words that rhyme, like words that have a rhythm to them, like being really interested in that.
Yeah, I was really fixated on Shel Silverstein when I was a really little kid. It's kind of subversive and funny, and the rhyming I thought was cool. And then I get older and I'm like, this is the most terrifying author photo for a
Yes,
children's author.
Deeply terrifying.
Yeah, you're like, what? He's like barefooted and just like glaring at the camera. It's like, this is strange, but I get that. And you go to UVA, you major in poetry, you got out, you said you went to the Times. Did you go to the MFA program at UVA or did you get out and go start working?
Yeah, I got out. I was a Harper's intern. I was like scrambling for a job. I couldn't find anything. I was like, my life is over. And then like 2 months later, I got this kind of incredible job at the New York Times. I really feel like so lucky because it was 2008, which was sort of the beginning of, I mean, obviously the financial crisis, like shit was going downhill in every industry, but especially in journalism, like beginning of really hard times to come. And I sort of like got in under the wire and I started as an assistant at the op-ed page. And then I stayed there for 12 years, just like moving up. And I edited the Sunday Review for a long time. And I did like our cover stories. I loved it there. And I just been there for like a really long time. At some point I was like, I should probably work somewhere else. And then like the Atlantic is the Atlantic. So I was like so lucky to come here.
What was the training that you got on the job at the New York Times? I'm curious, like what, like, because if you come in as an assistant, like what do they have you doing? And like, what do you feel like you learned?
Yeah, well, you are just thrown in. I remember editing one thing for the first time and my boss at the time, David Shipley, was like, okay. And then just like undid everything that I'd done. And he was like, let's go through it one by one. Like, did this need to change? And like, did you change it in the right way? And I was like, oh, my life is over. But it was incredible training. And I would just edit something and then the deputy, Marion Duenwald, who was also wonderful, would like read over it. And eventually she stopped needing to read over it. And then they were like, you can be promoted now. So it was incredible. I mean, it's also like a newspaper. You're closing so many things so quickly that you get like your reps in really, really fast.
Yeah. There's no time to dawdle. I mean, it's just a constant churn. And it's interesting to me to think about the way in which a person's sensibility impresses itself on a publication like that, like inevitably. I mean, this happens in every printed work if there's an editor involved in the process. But they were essentially training you, I mean, on some of the basics, but also I think training you to sort of learn how to model their approach, or do you know what I'm saying? Like how much of a person's kind of personal taste is inflected in what people read when they pick up a copy of the New York Times.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I definitely have had experiences like when somebody's reached out to me about a story we've published and been like, is this one of yours? Like, is this something you edited? Which I think maybe is less like my handiwork at work and more just like, I could tell you would have loved the story. Like, this is a story you would have wanted to do, and usually they're right about that. Although we publish things all the time that I wish I had been mine, that I am jealous of. But yeah, I think, you're trying to be invisible for sure. You're trying to, you're serving the writer, but you're also serving the story itself, which is sort of a third party. And it's just like, whatever you want to say or whatever like the agenda of the writer is, like there's some sort of internal logic of the story and like a voice that needs to come out to like make the point that needs to be made. And so navigating all those personalities is like always interesting and a challenge.
Is there a story or stories that you can point to that you've worked on that were really kind of like monumental experiences or memorable for some reason?
Yeah, most recently, one story that I really loved and was really proud of was Janisha Watts, my colleague at The Atlantic, wrote a cover story called Janisha from Kentucky. And it's just like, it's so beautiful and it's so controlled. It's a story of growing up and her mother suffered from a crack addiction. And, she and her siblings, like one of five, like grew up in quite dire straits. And she really went through a lot and like did this kind of incredible like personal reporting where she interviewed all the members of her family including people who did not want her to write about what she was writing about, which was also like a history of generational trauma and sexual trauma, and like in addition to poverty and what was going on in Lexington, Kentucky at the time. And anyway, it was just like such a monumental feat, and it became like filled with these voices of like her family and herself, and she learned all these things about her own, you know, things that had happened to her when she was too young to remember, that are, you know, documented by the police or, you know, child services, and it really was so brave. Anyway, I love her, and she's of course turning that into like a book that I think will be really, really special.
I was going to say, that's a big story.
Yeah.
How many words was it in the magazine?
I think it was like 7,000,
Okay.
7,000, which is a lot, like the longer end of features. I mean, we do things longer, but like a bit longer than the normal feature.
So a lot of my listeners are writerly, and I'm sure there are some of them out there who are like thinking to themselves like, oh, Honor, you know, worked at the New York Times and she's an editor for The Atlantic. Like, I love to write personal essays. How do I get my stuff? How do I get an op-ed published in the New York Times? Or how do I get my personal essay in The Atlantic? Like, how does that even, you know, I know that there are a lot of literary agents who might be feeding you stuff. Maybe you're picking stuff up off the slush pile, but probably not as frequently. Or you have relationships with writers. You live in New York. It's, you know, it's kind of a small town in that way. How does it actually go? And what advice would you give to somebody who is out there and who is an aspirant and would love to one day be published in one of these big venues?
Yeah. I mean, the Times, like the opinion page, like especially when I was coming up, was like, it's made to be open to the world. Like it's made to be like, you know, you're supposed to have a flood hose of submissions coming at you. So the slush was like a huge part of that. Like I've definitely taken personal essays out of the slush. Here we don't really, I don't even know if we have a slush. And we also like, because we're a smaller magazine, we don't publish as much. And because, you know, we're in the news moment we're in, we don't publish as much, but of freelance personal essays. But there are always ways, you can always email me. You can like figure out what my email address is. So it's really hard to...
Can I interrupt you actually?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If somebody were to email an editor directly,
mm-hmm.
are there best practices? Like, because it's one thing to email an editor. It's another thing to like email an editor like a 4,500 word email, like explaining your life story and, you know, this terrific idea you have. Like, what's
mm-hmm.
the proper way to do it?
I mean, different editors prefer different things, but generally I would say like, hey, editor, like I have this story about this thing that I'm selling you on in like 3 sentences. Like, you know, I went ahead and like wrote a draft if you'd be willing to take a look. I think especially for a personal essay, like there's no point in having a conversation about it beforehand. I mean, that's not always true, but like generally, especially if it's a writer if it's a writer I know, obviously I'm talking with them about their life and what they're thinking. But if it's a new person, it's like, they just have to write it. You'll have no idea if it works or not unless you're reading it. But part of the job too is being able to say like, oh, this doesn't quite work as written, but like, wow, what a story, or like, what a voice. And that's all just in the doing. So I always think like, explain what you're sending and then just send it.
And then do you have any perspective on, I mean, I don't mean to make you the spokesperson for like the Times or something, but this is kind of a fraught moment for journalism. And I feel like the last several years, there's been a lot of consternation about coverage and perspective and trends in the news business, not just at the Times, though the Washington Post obviously is another one that I feel like has come under fire.
Yeah.
But as somebody who has worked inside and who continues to kind of work inside of the American journalistic, like institutional journalism or whatever, like what would you say to all that? Like, what's your feeling about it?
Oh man, I mean, I just think like we just have to do the work. I mean, there's so many debates about how a story is covered, and they're important debates. And I don't know, I always feel a little protective of newsrooms when it's like, that headline sucked. It's like, I don't know, there's like 1,000 people working on 1,000 things. And like, sometimes the headline isn't the right headline, and then they have to do a better job with, you know, it's easy to nitpick. But generally, I think like, oof, the coverage people are doing is really, really important, and it's really hard to do. And it takes a lot of courage, and it's really can be really depressing and hard. So
yeah, I just think that there's this like, I think there's this insinuation, or it's even I think explicit on social media, where people will be like, you know, there are nefarious forces at work. And I'm like, maybe, but I'm like you. I know how big of an operation it is. It's maybe there are people at the top who have the wrong ideas or the wrong approach, but it just seems like they're mostly like, am I correct in assuming that most of the people who are working, especially the journalists who are like out there in the field on their beat, covering whatever it is they're covering, are sort of in it for the right reasons?
100%. Yes. Yeah. I mean, definitely. Like, yeah, like I think especially when you're talking about the Times, it's like people think it's like, I don't know, some like perfect entity that like should never make a mistake. And it's like, oh, there's just like full of people and they're really trying their best. And of course, like mistakes are made and like we've learned things that like we were wrong about big stories or like we were wrong about our approach to stories sometimes. Like I do think, there are definitely things to learn, but generally it's like, thank God that that these journalists are doing this work is how I feel.
Yeah. I mean, we need people out there covering and, especially, smart people who are doing it in good faith.
Yeah.
Do you have, now that you've published this novel, like written and published this novel, do you have like a different conception of your career and like what you're up to? Like, I know you see yourself obviously as an editor. Now you're a novelist, but like, are you envisioning a future in which you're publishing more novels or books of other kinds?
I would like to. I've just about finished a draft of a second novel, so fingers crossed everyone likes it. The first novel's out next week, so I still feel like it hasn't fully happened yet. But yeah, I can't imagine not being here every day and like editing, the next piece on tariffs and like the next piece on microplastics and like whatever my writers are working on. Yeah, I can't really see that not being part of my life.
We need you on the microplastics beat.
It's going to be a great piece. Trust me, it's really good.
I'm like, there's a part of me that's like terrified of that stuff, obviously, because you're like, what am I putting into my body? And then there's another part of me that you just start to become resigned. You're like, it's already happened. So they're in there.
That's exactly what the story's about. Yeah.
There's like a credit card of microplastics, essentially, just like floating.
Probably more. Yeah.
Yeah. Ew.
Maybe.
So depressing. What have we done to this planet? Human beings, we're such a mess.
We are.
And so, yeah, as we're talking, you're a week out from publication.
It's Monday, so today's Friday. So yeah, I just got the weekend, and then Tuesday is the pub date. Yeah.
And how are you feeling?
I feel good. I feel like Riverhead is great. I'm like well positioned. Sort of what happens now is out of my hands. I'm excited for my book launch. I think it'll be mostly my friends there, but I'm excited to see my friends. Yeah.
That's nice. It's a nice moment. And what I always say is like writers, you don't have that many such moments. Mm-hmm. Like even if you publish like a book a year, that's just like once a year you do this really, and very few people publish that frequently. So
no, I'm like getting my nails done. I'm acting like it's prom. I'm excited.
Are you going to wear like a prom dress to your reading?
Definitely a corsage, the white gloves. It's going to be great. People are going to take me very seriously.
I know, especially when you arrive at the bookstore in a horse-drawn carriage. I mean, that's a very auspicious...
I don't know if I can get one down to Brooklyn from Central Park, but I could work on it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Tell Bill Clegg to make some calls. He can arrange that.
He'll drive.
Yeah. And so... It sounds like you've been busy, though, because you finished this book, it went out, found a publisher, and then you've just kind of continued in that rhythm of like writing fiction on your off days.
Yep.
And then what is the second? I mean, you don't have to tell me the plot of the second book, but do you have some like broad strokes that you can give me that to kind of explain what you're interested in?
Yeah. I mean, it's also about parenting and a marriage to some extent. But it's also like a little more sinister and like a little less lyrical maybe, and like there's a bit of like satire going on. I don't know. I find you need other people to tell you what your book is about, to be honest. So I'm probably...
You need an editor.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's the missing piece. So before we part company, I also want to ask you about the cover design for your book. I found it really striking. And I also, in conjunction with that, want to talk with you about the title.
Oh, sure.
Because it's an interesting choice, but I really love the cover of your book, and it's sort of like aquatic vibes. There's like a woman. Is it a woman or a girl like swimming?
It's a woman, yeah.
So can you just talk about all of that? Like, I'm curious to know about the title choice and how you landed on that beautiful cover.
Yeah, well, I had a lot of trouble with the title, and I also kept calling it the headline, which is very embarrassing. Like, I like could not stop calling it the headline, and people were like, this is not inspiring confidence. But honestly, it was my boyfriend, and he was like, well, what headlines? What titles do you like? And I was like, I like The Waves, that Virginia Woolf book. And like, he was like, well, what are the waves in this book? Like, what's the sort of thing that orders it, the thing that keeps returning? And I was like, oh, sleep. And then he was like, that's it. And it feels really right to me. I mean, so much of it is about, the original transgression takes place while she's sleeping. The adult section begins and she's watching her daughter sleep. It's about like this liminal space between knowing and unknowing. And like, when you time sort of collapses and you could be anybody. It could be any time. You could be 13 again. You could be, back home. And then you sort of like come back into your body and your life. So that's why it's called Sleep.
Do you sleep well?
I do kind of sleep fine. Yeah. I wake up really early because I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. So
yeah, this is what I always say. Like I know some people truly have a terrible time sleeping, but like you just might not be like doing enough. If you get up early enough, if you're exhausted enough, you'll sleep.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, it's like I could go to bed at 9:45 and wake up at 5:45 and be very happy. And then I think the cover, like they were very smartly like, if you stick with this ridiculous title, like you have to have a cover that does not look sleepy, that looks like very awake and bright. So I think that was part of the design, but I love how it turned out. I mean, they're geniuses at what they do, like this design team. So I'm very grateful to that.
So how many did you go through? Was that the first cover they showed you, or were there others?
They showed me one other, but it was always this design. We like tweaked the painting. We chose a different painting. But yeah, I think Riverhead kind of knows what it's doing. Like, I think maybe there are other houses where they're like, let's have a big conversation. Like, show me your mood board. And they're like, you're not a designer. And I'm like, correct. So
yeah, one of the most there are a lot of embarrassing moments in my career, but like early on with my debut novel years and years ago, my editor was like, if you have some ideas for your cover, like send them on over. So I was like, holy shit. And like, I basically created a mood board, and it was like, I really want this to have like a David Hockney feel of I just went on and on and on, and they were just like, okay. This guy.
Did any of that show up in the final?
No. It was an era in publishing where there are lots of books with like sky, like a lot of book covers with like the blue sky and some wispy clouds. It was like that kind of thing. And I was like, all right. So yeah, I kind of like, I was just so keyed up to do anything, to make
totally. You're like, how can I be helpful?
They asked me like a question in passing, and I like ran with it and spent like 3 days putting together a document.
I would have done the same. Like, luckily they were very clear. They were like, no, thank you. I was like, got it.
Yeah. Is there anything in the pipeline at The Atlantic that we want to plug? Is there some article I know you've been dealing with microplastics, but is there anything cool happening on that front?
Oh, man. I mean, we're covering the Trump administration as hard as we can. And I think that's the main brief right now. And
that's an interesting question. Like, is it tough? Is there pushback? Is it tougher than it has been to cover previous administrations? I know there's a lot of contentiousness between like the free press and this regime.
I mean, I'm not the best person to ask about it because I do politics much less than most of my colleagues. So I'm not in these rooms and these.
You're like, hey, I'm on the microplastics beat.
Yeah, I'm like, I got the personal essays. I got it. I got it down. I'm very brave. I think it's hard, but I think they're finding things out and reporting them, and people are reading, and that's important.
Yeah. We need as much of that as possible, like sunlight, as much as we can get. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, and kudos on this debut novel of yours and on the work that you have been doing as an editor in the world of journalism. It's really fun to hear from you, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking with you.
Okay, there we have it. That was Honor Jones talking with me about her debut novel, Sleep. It is available now from Riverhead Books. You can find Honor online at honorjones.com. She's also on Instagram, and read her book. Once again, it is called Sleep. available now from Riverhead. Please remember to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to this show on YouTube, and you can follow me on Bluesky and Instagram. If you would like to receive my weekly email newsletter, you can sign up for it over at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you love this show, if you tune in week after week, if you get something from the work that I do and it adds something positive to your existence, I hope you will join the Other People Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. It will help me continue to do this work and make this show. If you would like to join the Other People Book Club or get an Other People t-shirt, you can do both of those things at the program's official website, otherppl.com. And be sure to sign up for the Deep Dive newsletter over at www.deepdive.audio. Once again, the debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. I am the host of the course, and it will feature more than 50 hours of instruction from dozens of today's leading writers. That will be available soon. Last but not least, if you have 2 minutes and you want to do me a favor, I would really appreciate it if you would rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is, just give the show a rating. If it's possible to write a quick review, that would be great. It helps the show in the algorithm and it helps it find new listeners. So coming up on Thursday, I will be back with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for a brand new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, this podcast's weekly pop culture assessment. It's a hangout show. It's intended to be light and fun. It's a way to kind of forget about your troubles. It's a way to just turn off whatever's happening in the world and focus on something silly, right? So check that out on Thursday, Brad and Mira for the Culture. Stay tuned.